So you've had quite some history in the space, and maybe you could tell us a little about your background and history in the blockchain and healthcare space.
Yeah, so to start off with, healthcare background, over 24 years in healthcare, spanning the different segments, provider, payer, pharmaceutical, life sciences. Worked for over a decade with the Intel Health and Life Sciences team as Director of Healthcare Privacy and Security, also covered compliance and blockchain. That's where I first got into blockchain. Initially, of course, it was asserted as a panacea for security, which we all know it isn't. It's got some strengths, but also some things you need to take care of. So part of my early work was to clarify, what blockchain brings, what you need to take care of, and then got deeply into it from that standpoint. And then just under 6 months ago, got a great opportunity with Microsoft, with the Azure team, the industry experiences team at Microsoft, and leading healthcare initiatives for that team, and continue to work 100% on healthcare, very much on the cloud side of healthcare IT. And blockchain is one of many very exciting workloads, along with AI, machine learning, still covering cybersecurity, privacy compliance, and IoT and all that exciting stuff. But blockchain has a key role to play, and actually it's very synergistic with a lot of those other technologies.
That's a great background too, and coming from your past work too, I think that there's a lot of synergy there. So in terms of what you're currently working on and what you're excited about too, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't mention in the introduction is I currently also serve as chair of the HIMSS Blockchain and Healthcare Task Force. It's an honor and a privilege, and working with almost 100 leaders from across healthcare segments worldwide to advance the application of blockchain in healthcare. And the things that really get me excited is on the application side of blockchain. So the different use cases that it's being applied to in healthcare for healthcare benefit. I'm not talking about the cryptocurrency sort of Bitcoin side of blockchain, not really talking much about the ICO fundraising side of blockchain. Those are exciting in their own right. But my focus and what gets me excited is the enterprise use cases for applying blockchain in healthcare, and what are the business values that can be gleaned. So reducing healthcare costs is the leading one. Blockchain use cases that promise healthcare, helping to reduce costs are getting early traction. Some other use cases promise, improving patient outcomes, improving engagement of patients, experiences of patients, even experiences of healthcare professionals. So, it's those use cases ranging from drug supply chain, medical device track and trace. Even food supply chain has some relevance to healthcare, right? If there's a food poisoning of some kind, being able to identify quickly and pull those off shelves can save patient lives. So, of course, provider credentialing, super exciting things going on with Hashed Health and ProCredX, provider directory, anti-fraud, just a few of the exciting use cases that we're seeing blockchain be applied to in healthcare for those business benefits I mentioned.
David, you've got a background in a lot of different areas, not just blockchain, but you've done a lot of work on IoT. Back when you were at Intel, we talked a lot about things like secure enclaves, but you've also done a lot of work around AI and machine learning. And, we think a lot as we're putting together the book around this convergence of technologies. Even some healthcare specific things around genomics and precision medicine. Mm-hmm. But just talk to me a little bit, put that in context for us. How important and what relationship does blockchain have to these other areas that are kind of a buzz right now?
Yeah, so one of the ways I try to explain, it's a great question, is sort of a layered view of it, where, today we have the healthcare data mostly in silos across organizations locked up. A lot of latent potential to share that in a targeted, secure way for those business benefits I mentioned. Blockchain, of course, can be the platform to enable that targeted, secure sharing. But on top of blockchain, of course, you could have smart contracts to automate the execution on the blockchain. You've got cryptocurrencies that can incent collaboration on blockchain and reward engagement. So patient engagement could be rewarded, patient compliance, et cetera. Sharing of data, collaboration around blockchain can be rewarded with cryptocurrencies. But then AI machine learning on top of that. I've done a ton of work at the intersection of AI and blockchain. And the thing with AI and machine learning is they're super data hungry, right? And almost all AI efforts are limited. They're constrained in how good an inference they can get by the data that they have to train the model. And usually that's because the data they're pulling is from one silo within one organization. Blockchain gives us the opportunity to collaborate across a consortium of healthcare organizations to source data from across the consortium. So vastly increase the data available to train models, even much more specialized models where you need a very specific type of data to train a specific model. And because you're sourcing it from a consortium, you can get sort of critical mass of data to get a reasonable inference or reasonably low error rate. But just any task really that you can accomplish better as a team, as a consortium, blockchain is an opportunity to catalyze and incent that with cryptocurrencies. So not just sourcing training data, but actually collaborating on training models. You can imagine a model being passed around like a football between different healthcare organizations in a consortium and incrementally trained. So those organizations wouldn't even have to share the raw data. Say there was constraints on opt-ins and things like that. They could train the models within each organization, pass it around and share the models. They can also collaborate on, the results that come from those models and validation of those results. How do you trust a new model? Well, you could learn to trust it yourself by trying it on lots and lots of data and figuring out, was it right or not? That's going to take a certain amount of time for one organization doing it alone. But if you have a consortium of organizations collaborating, they can learn to trust the model much faster as a group, right? And establish that trust. So pretty much any task, again, that can be accomplished better as a team, as a consortium of healthcare organizations, blockchain is an opportunity to enable that with the targeted secure sharing and even incent it with the cryptocurrencies and tokens. And you mentioned IoT as well. So IoT has some super interesting intersects with both blockchain and AI machine learning. On the blockchain intersect side, you look at use cases like drug supply chain, where you're tracking medications from point of manufacturing to distribution to dispensing or retail, like at a pharmacy, and being able to verify the provenance, the authenticity, the safety of the medication, right? It's not a counterfeit, it's safe to consume, especially if it comes over a channel like the internet. You want to make sure it's the real thing, right? It's safe to consume. But just tracking the drug is one thing, but what if you could track, especially for drugs that are sensitive to environmental parameters like temperature, if you could track, what were the temperature parameters of this vaccine as it made its way through the supply chain? And that's where IoT, like temperature sensors, could track the environmental conditions throughout the supply chain. And so when you do your verification check at the point of dispensing or use, you're checking not just, is this the real thing and is it safe, but has it been kept within safe bounds of temperature, humidity, or whatever the constraints are, to make sure it hasn't gone off or something like that. So you can actually record that kind of information on the blockchain. The IoT sensors can record that on the blockchain. Intersect with AI machine learning, of course, again, super data hungry. And that data, AI machine learning gives us the opportunity to process vast quantities of data in near real time, right? And get near real time actionable insights to improve healthcare, reduce costs, again, improve outcomes, et cetera. And, I think of IoT as the eyes and ears of AI and machine learning, right? We're going to have sensors, in patients, implantables, on patients, the wearables around patients, whether it's in a patient home, like remote patient monitoring, whether it's, in a clinical setting, in your car even, these different IoT sensors monitoring the patient, being able to detect, in near real time, hey, this patient's vitals are trending outside of safe bounds. We need to intervene, we need to intercept, we need to course correct so that patient doesn't have an episode, because an episode is not just a huge cost event like a heart attack, patient going into hospital, very costly, but it actually degrades the patient quality of life. So if you can intercept that before it happens and get that patient onto a safe path, they don't have that episode. That's some of the amazing sort of, we call it proactive preventative healthcare potential around IoT. Again, the eyes and ears, and sourcing AI machine learning to give us those near real-time insights to intercept and proactively prevent episodes and improve healthcare.
Yeah, and IoT is not new, right? I mean, it seems like we've been struggling with a lot of issues around security and scalability for quite some time for IoT kind of platforms, IoT initiatives. Can you quickly just comment on the key kind of ability for blockchain and distributed ledgers to provide the trusted, secure platform so that these IoT products can scale up in a meaningful way?
Yeah, interesting question. So some of the work I did at Intel was around their, Sawtooth Lake, or what became Hyperledger Sawtooth blockchain platform. And it uses a different consensus algorithm called POET, or proof of elapsed time. And POET, I think of like a deli counter. You go there, you take a ticket, and that's your place in line. And with Sawtooth Lake, instead, each blockchain node running on top of Intel SGX, or software guard extensions hardware, each blockchain node can reach down and get a ticket, and that's what we call a guaranteed wait time. And then the one with the lowest wait time can be essentially elected as the leader in the validation of the next block to go on the blockchain. The reason why that's so interesting is we all know, proof of work type consensus algorithms can require massive amounts of hardware and electric power, and this gives it a much more democratic. Over time, all the nodes would participate equally as leaders in validating blocks going onto the blockchain, versus in the Bitcoin world, you only really participate if you've got monstrous amounts of hardware and electric power to throw out, mining blocks, or solving the crypto puzzles to become the one that commits the block. So these kinds of technologies, these hardware security technologies like SGX, give you the opportunity to implement new sort of hardware roots of trust, which can underpin consensus algorithms, which can greatly increase the decentralization of blockchain and nodes and participation in consensus and things like that. And although blockchain is asserted as decentralized, if you have a consensus algorithm like proof of work, where you effectively only have about 10 mining operations worldwide that are competitively mining Bitcoins, is it really decentralized if you only have 10 that are really doing it? So you can have this perception of decentralization versus the reality. To have true decentralization, you really want to have almost random sort of white noise selection of nodes that over time every node could participate, and then you've got true decentralization. And of course, decentralization underpins the whole availability value assertion of blockchain, where you don't want to have a single or a few points of failure that could compromise the whole blockchain network. So I know I went very deep there, but IoT, obviously, you can have hardware security in IoT devices, and they can underpin blockchain nodes and enable those devices to participate as actual nodes in a blockchain with new types of consensus algorithm and decentralization. Was there more to your question, or did that hit the?
No, I think you described it well. And I was really kind of thinking about what does blockchain bring to the table that hasn't been there in the past that will allow IoT to realize its full potential. And I think that kind of that layer of trusted data around the security and scalability of IoT kind of needs that foundation to sit on. Same with AI and machine learning and these kind of data hungry. If you can provide a platform of information for these things to run, it really allows them to scale. I do have one more question. I'll hand it back over to David Metcalf. But following up, some of your comments started to talk about decentralization. And I've said in a lot of my talks in 2018 that decentralization to me feels like a beautiful dream that it is just yet to be realized, and really anything other than Bitcoin. Can you just provide some of your thoughts on that topic? It's a topic of debate. Not everyone agrees with my perspective. Maybe it'd be great to have a couple of quick thoughts from your perspective.
Yeah, happy to. And it's a great question. And full, disclosure, I tend to take a very practical, sort of pragmatic approach to blockchain. And I steer clear of the sort of what I call the blockchain religion, where, we can get caught up with the concept of decentralization. And if something isn't on a public blockchain, it's not blockchain. And Really, in the near term, the vast majority of healthcare blockchain use cases and pilots and production usages are going to be on private consortium blockchains, which are not public. They're going to have a very well-defined set of healthcare organizations participating that are highly trusted, and they're well known to each other. And so I think, in terms of decentralization, you have to take a practical approach, and rather than grounding it in blockchain religion, I think it makes sense to ground it in what are the healthcare use cases and what are the healthcare values? Again, is it reducing healthcare costs? Is it reducing, adverse event like improving patient outcomes? Is it improving patient engagement, improving patient experience or healthcare professional experience? That's what you got to ground it on, the healthcare values, the business values that healthcare is seeking, not any technical concept like decentralization. That said, the concept of decentralization obviously is important for the reliability value assertion of blockchain. If you reduce it to one sort of blockchain node, then you essentially have a single point of failure again, and then the argument comes up, why use blockchain? And so you need some level of decentralization. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, just to get that availability benefit. And also a lot of people miss the anti-fraud value prop of blockchain and the immutability to prevent fraudulent modification or deletion and improve transparency to detect new fraudulent transactions. But to really realize that anti-fraud benefit, you need to have enough decentralization so that collusion is not practical. If you have like 2 nodes or 3 nodes, then if 2 of the nodes collude, then you could essentially corrupt the blockchain or introduce fraudulent type transactions. So you want to have enough nodes that you get the availability benefit, you get the anti-fraud risk mitigation benefit, and there are other benefits. But you want to be, I see it as more of a grayscale, not you're either fully decentralized or you're not. It's somewhere in between, and where you set the slider to me should depend on balancing the technical objectives like availability and anti-fraud with the business objectives, the business values you seek, and making sure those are realized. At the end of the day, what's going to get blockchain traction in healthcare is the realization of those business values by real healthcare organizations and the publication of those pilot results in case studies where those organizations attest to the business values. That's a critical step that I think we're trending towards as an industry. And we really need to see those case studies in the next 6 months or so. And that'll be a sort of watershed moment, I think, for blockchain and healthcare. And that, once you get a sort of critical mass of healthcare organizations standing up and saying, we're not just talking, we've done this blockchain use case. These are results. This is the business value we saw at the ROI. This is what worked well. This is what could be improved. I think that is going to be a beachhead on which, blockchain will grow. And, right now there's all these private consortium blockchains, which I think of as like blockchain islands in an archipelago. And some will get there and some won't. The ones that don't will die off. They'll be, selected out. The ones that do get there, they will rapidly acquire new healthcare organizations on their island. They'll grow in terms of the size of the consortium, as well as being able to layer on additional, use cases. If they start with provider credentialing, they could layer on provider directory or, the various supply chain use cases or health information exchange. As you know, that the technology is the easy part, building the consortium and the trust and getting buy-in and getting organizations to actually connect their enterprise systems and transact on blockchain is the hard part. Layering on additional use cases is relatively easy once you've done that for the first one, right?
Yeah, I want to build on that too. Where do you see some of that synergy and some of that realism right now in where we're at in the space?
Well, I think there's definitely 5 or so leading use cases that have very strong healthcare value props. In particular, any use case that has a strong value prop of cost reduction seems to be getting early traction in healthcare. I think some of the ones that are asserting, empowering the patient and, better patient outcomes are coming, but they may not be the first ones, the killer use cases to get the first sort of traction. Almost all of the 5 that we're tracking, those being drug supply chain, medical device track and trace, health information exchange, provider credentialing, provider directory, almost all of them have a very strong cost reduction value prop.
How about the trust between distributed payers and the providers, whether that's in a hospital setting or the individual doctors and healthcare workers in particular? Any thoughts there on what's going to change over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it demands a mindset shift, and just the concept of sharing, even with another organization that you've traditionally considered to be a competitor. And in short, I think it has to be a case of the benefits outweigh the risks,
Mm-hmm.
and everything you're sharing has to be very intentional from from realizing those business values standpoint. So I think building the consortium again is the hard part. So anyone out there that's thinking about blockchain, thinking about a use case, thinking about technologies, you need to start from like square one, thinking about who is your consortium, right? What are the organizations with an S, multiple? Blockchain's not a single organization thing in general. And getting them engaged, right? And getting them bought into the concept right from the get-go, and building the blockchain and designing the blockchain essentially with their participation, I think is really key. And then, as the saying goes, trust is won in drips and lost in buckets. So you've got to get people bought in and connected and transacting around a simple use case that's relatively benign. If you have one that minimizes PII, or personally identifiable information, and protected healthcare information, PHI, that's better, right? Security, privacy, compliance risk is greater with PII and PHI. So a lot of the early use cases actually avoid or minimize the presence of PII or PHI on the actual blockchain. But getting people to buy into the use case, the business value assertions, and then what data do you actually share on the blockchain should be minimum but sufficient for the actual use case. So you're only sharing what is absolutely critical, to go on the blockchain. The rest of the data can remain in the secure access controlled enterprise systems where it lives today, whether it's the EHR on the provider side, whether it's the payer system for membership eligibility, claims adjudication, or, it's the pharmacy system, pharmaceutical system. The data can live in its current silos unless there's a compelling need for it to live elsewhere, right? And so blockchain can serve this role as a sort of catalyst to enable the collaboration and secure sharing of data. But the sharing doesn't, actually have to happen all through the blockchain. Like, as blockchain could facilitate the sort of publication of metadata or transactions, audit logs, the discovery of that information by other members of the consortium. And once they find something of interest, they can initiate a secure direct peer-to-peer request to the source organization and facilitate that secure exchange on an as needed basis, right? And that direct peer-to-peer exchange doesn't have to happen through blockchain. Again, blockchain, minimum bit sufficient, avoid PII, PHI if you can. Avoid anything heavyweight, images, genomics. Don't try to put that on blockchain. There's real performance reasons you don't want to do that as well. Did that hit
or the full electronic health record of a person, right? We keep talking about not a good idea, right?
I mean, some of again, it's the blockchain religion, asserts, hey, let's put all our data on blockchain and figure out later how to make use of it. As we all know, that's not the recipe for success. There's huge privacy, security, compliance, competitive, and performance scalability reasons why you don't want to do that.
Yeah, so it's blockchain plus whatever else is going to be effective for your use case and your business outcome that you're looking for, or health outcome that you're looking for.
That's a great way to look at it. It's almost like a machine. Like, we have this machine today, which is all these cogs which are inside each organization, in the enterprise systems and the organizations. And what's been missing is this central cog, which sort of allows all those organizations to collaborate. And that's the blockchain central cog, but it's just one cog in the overall machine, right? A lot of the blockchain religion asserts, hey, blockchain is going to replace all the enterprise systems. We don't see that at all. It's this back-end middleware that, again, takes this minimum but sufficient role to facilitate collaboration and coordination. But the enterprise systems live on. Blockchain has no user interface. It's, where are the user interfaces? It's the user interfaces of the enterprise systems, or maybe, new user interfaces you add, web interfaces, mobile app interfaces, but they're not really talking to the blockchain directly. Typically, there's a sort of mid-tier that's integrating with the blockchain on the back end, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's great. So the next question, maybe you can think about which direction you'd like to take it, but what are the things that you are most concerned about in the future of blockchain, or which things you most hopeful for in the future of blockchain?
Yeah, and I think I'll take that in the direction of cybersecurity because we haven't talked about that a whole lot, and I think it needs a little bit more attention. Is, in healthcare we've seen the risk that comes from covered entities or data controllers working with business associates or data processors, and there's a breach can occur at a business associate or data processor, and it impacts the covered entity or the data controller. Blockchain really introduces this concept of consortiums on a whole other level, right? And when you start putting data on blockchain and collaborating with a network of other healthcare organizations, there are risks associated with that. You want to try to contain those risks or mitigate them from a security standpoint. And so you're going to use a multi-layered defense in depth approach. First, minimum bit sufficient information on the blockchain. That's the biggest lever you have to pull. The second one is limit who can connect to that blockchain. Again, private consortium, 99% of the use cases we're seeing in blockchain and healthcare are private consortium, and they know exactly what are the organizations connecting, why are they connecting, what's their business need, do you trust them, etc. They're all well-known and highly trusted. And then, of course, encryption, and not just like one encryption key, but key rotation functions, key derivation functions, so that if the key's ever broken, it doesn't expose the entire blockchain, etc. So you've got all these layers of defense to put in any blockchain initiative to mitigate what we call residual risk. But there's this concept of adequacy where wherever you have a network of organizations collaborating and sharing data, and you don't even need to put the PII and PHI on the blockchain. If the blockchain facilitates the actual discovery and sharing of the PII and PHI, and a breach subsequently occurs, that's going to backfire on the organization where the breach happened, plus the blockchain network and the source organization. So there's this concept of, if you are going to join a blockchain, make sure you trust everybody that's connecting to that and how they're using the data. And you actually want to proactively get a measure of the adequacy of their security and privacy and compliance, because if you have a consortium of 10 organizations joining and one of them is kind of a weak link, if you will, in terms of, they're connecting to the blockchain and they're pulling information off the blockchain or in, interactions that are, enabled by the blockchain, and putting that information in their own enterprise systems, which are insecure, then a breach occurs. It impacts everybody, right? And so this is something not a lot of people are talking about, but if we have a breach event that happens in a blockchain network and taints that blockchain, it could really stall or impede the adoption of blockchain in healthcare. And so I think we need to think about these kind of risks, right? Healthcare has struggled to secure their own healthcare organizations adequately from a privacy, security, and achieving compliance standpoint. When it comes to a blockchain network, that takes it up to a whole other level where you're not just worried about securing your own organization. You got to make sure that everybody is connecting to that blockchain is adequately secure. So good news is there's techniques like risk assessment and compliance audits and so forth that can be done proactively. What you might say as an organization, if I'm joining this blockchain network, have all the other organizations that are connecting to it had their risk assessment done? Can they share that at least under NDA? Have they achieved, compliance, whatever the jurisdiction they're in? If it's, Europe, it's going to have a certain set of data protection laws. If it's the US, it's going to have, HIPAA, maybe high trust. And this sort of proactive benchmarking or measurement of security and privacy and compliance and identification of weak links and then mitigation of those weak links proactively so that, again, we don't have these breach events that could derail or impede the adoption of blockchain.
That's
great.
Yeah, those are interesting comments. And, I think as we have been in the space for several years now, I think we're all seeing this concept of kind of enterprise reputation coming forward, especially as some of the business models behind some of these use cases look more like marketplaces. A lot has to do with the reputation of the buyer or seller on that marketplace. So I've been thinking about that concept from like a data standpoint. So everything you just said around security also goes for the quality of the data that an enterprise is bringing to a marketplace business model, the quality of the credentials or the quality of the master data file that we're turning into a utility model, a utility marketplace for a market. So I think that's a really interesting connection, that what you just said, how it connects to lots of different use cases that are out there.
Yeah.
David, any
Yeah.
other follow-up questions?
Yeah,
No,
I just wanted to
sorry, I was just
catch
going to
up.
comment there on top of
Yeah.
John's comment on the integrity and quality of the data is super interesting. You know, in security, we're always, as professionals, we're tasked with protecting the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data. But too often we equate security with protecting just confidentiality. But to John's point, you really got to protect the integrity, and that's making sure the data is accurate, up to date, and it's complete. And blockchain can only protect what arrives at blockchain, right? From a immutability standpoint, a transparency standpoint. If the data is compromised or poor quality before it reaches the blockchain, then essentially you end up with a garbage in, and garbage out scenario where you're protecting garbage on the blockchain. So super important that the data that gets put onto blockchain has the integrity and the quality that's needed. Otherwise, blockchain is not going to realize its potential.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that too, with the idea that, of course, Microsoft and really your span with HIMSS and others is global. And as a global enterprise too, I'm sure you're looking at the different jurisdictions. You mentioned HIPAA, of course, which we all know, and high tech, high trust. And when we look at some of the things that are going on there in those communities, what happens when we get over to GDPR and safe harbor and other areas of the world too, like Europe in particular? Any thoughts there on how the blockchain may change when we get over there?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, and safe harbor is an interesting thing you brought up, because it also had this concept of adequacy that if European citizen data is going to be shared in the U.S., they wanted to make sure you had adequate security, privacy, etc. And the U.S. regulations and the Patriot Act and things were deemed to be not adequate security. So safe harbor introduced a set of additional bars that organizations had to meet to get adequate in the eyes of European, law. Now, I think, in terms of compliance with regulations, one of the tie-ins as well is, what regulations or data protection laws you're held to are going to depend on two key things: the type of data you're putting on the blockchain. So especially if it's PII or personally identifiable information of any kind, it can be used to locate, contact, or identify an individual. Then you need to be careful, right? What citizens is that PII coming from? If it's coming from European citizens, then GDPR could be applicable. The other thing that's important is the actual physical location of the blockchain nodes, because the data that is in the shared ledger is essentially replicated to wherever the blockchain nodes are. So if you start off with your blockchain in Europe and you're complying within the regulations and that, or with the data protection laws in that sort of jurisdiction like GDPR, but then at some point you stand up a node in the US, then essentially, the data in the shared ledger is going to be replicated over to that new blockchain node in the US, and you can end up with something we call data sovereignty concerns or transporter data flow concerns. And you need to be careful based on the jurisdictions and the compliance frameworks you're held to. Are there any restrictions on data sovereignty, transporter data flow? And it's not an easy question, because blockchain startups don't always know all the directions the blockchain could grow in the future, right? They might start local but aspire to go global. But the thing is, with a blockchain, any data you put on that blockchain from day one is going to be replicated wherever you put those nodes. So it maybe is a good idea to be conservative. Again, minimum but sufficient data on the blockchain. Avoid PII, PHI if you can. One of the other wrinkles with organized data protection laws like GDPR is this right to be forgotten. If a patient comes along and says, hey, I want you to delete my data to the data controller, the healthcare organization, then they essentially have to delete that data to comply with GDPR. And if you put their PII on the blockchain, as we know, it's immutable. So you can't delete it off the blockchain without compromising that blockchain's immutability. And so another reason to keep the PII and PHI off of the blockchain. And so if you get that kind of request, you can delete it in a secure access controlled enterprise database, essentially de-identify whatever's on the blockchain. You can still have an identifier on blockchain, but it's going to be a benign identifier, not like a social security number or something like that. Just an identifier that's unique within that blockchain, right? So if it was compromised, it's very limited usefulness outside of that blockchain.
Yeah, it's interesting. GDPR and blockchain, kind of these concepts around self-sovereign identity are very much aligned and like philosophically. But it's an example of where in practicality, they very much do not agree with each other in terms of how you'd make that happen.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, so David, just as we start to wrap up too, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the future, or anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to tell us about?
No, I think, some of the thoughts on my mind just from the Distributed Health Conference, which John and Hashed Health team, great job on that, really great event, from the sessions and the networking there, and the discussions that I've had there and in other forums. I think one of the things we can use as a tool to help people understand the potential of blockchain is to take a data-centric view. And, if anybody's ever sort of changed a phone number or changed an address recently, we know the pain of having to go to like hundreds of accounts and update that information, right? In healthcare, we have a similar problem. You got the same redundant information all over the place. And even if it was possible to maintain that accurately in all the locations, which it's not, and data gets out of date and, inaccuracies, and that causes a lot of friction in the healthcare system. And friction means, misidentification of patients, duplicate records, claims bouncing, et cetera. What we really have to get to, I think, looking at a data-centric view, is data that is common by nature needs to be maintained in a shared ledger, in a way that eliminates that redundant effort, eliminates or mitigates the opportunity for inconsistencies that cause friction. And that in itself will greatly improve healthcare in terms of cost reduction, in terms of making it less friction, if you will, to share information, to render great healthcare, and so forth. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. I'm confident blockchain will take hold, but we need to have early use cases get piloted with real consortiums of healthcare organizations, have those case studies, have those attestations, what worked well, what could we improve, and then build from there, and concurrently just make sure that, we don't step on some of the obvious mines from a cybersecurity privacy compliance standpoint with breaches. One can never be 100% mitigated, but do what we can with eyes wide open to mitigate risk of breaches and other adverse events that could again taint or derail or impede blockchain initiatives. So thanks very much for this opportunity. I'm super excited to see your book, and I guess the publication date will be HIMSS next year.
HIMSS this next year, and now we can call it our book. And I just wanted to thank you for both your contribution to this, and also to taking a leadership role in this emerging community too. Without people leading it, we're not going to go anywhere. So I appreciate you doing that and gathering the consortia effect that you're doing across both your day job and also the extra effort that you're going to for the industry through HIMSS. So thank you so much for participating today and for joining us.
Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, David. Take care.
Thanks, guys.